Welcome to the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. We are here each week to help you lead more confidently and make a bigger difference, both professionally and personally. This episode is sponsored by 13 Days to Remarkable Leadership, a free leadership video series based on Kevin's book, Remarkable Leadership. Sign up by going to remarkablepodcast.com/13 days. And now, here's your host, Kevin.
Welcome, everybody, to today's Live with Kevin. It's also today's Remarkable Leadership Podcast. Have you ever wondered how culture and leadership in sports might translate to the business world? Have you ever met someone who that every time you're with them, you feel like you learned something important? Well, today's guest joined us for our virtual LeaderCon last fall, and we had some technical troubles. So many of our audience missed him, and that was really quite a shame. So that made my team sad. In fact, they said, Kevin, you've got to get this guy on the podcast. He's a smart leader with a major sports connection and a great story, and it will make for a wonderful conversation. So welcome to another live episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. Now, you can get all future live episodes and therefore interact with us and see them sooner by joining our Facebook or LinkedIn groups. Just go to remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook or remarkablepodcast.com/LinkedIn. Now, today's episode is brought to you by our new book, The Long Distance Teammate. If you work remotely and want more effective, more productive, more engaged, and more connectedness, this book will help you get there, because there's a big difference between working from home and being an engaged and effective remote teammate. You can learn more and get your copy at longdistanceteammate.com. Let me introduce my guest. There he is. His name is Darrin Gray. Let me tell you a little bit about Darrin. He's one of the guys that you're going to be glad that you know after this conversation. He's been immersed in the world of sports philanthropy, sports media, and sports ministry for decades. He serves as the chief marketing officer at Athletes in Action and leads AIA's NFL Advisory Council and helps steward their global influence through sports. We'll talk about that today. He is a frequent speaker at college and with college and pro teams, and is an accomplished public speaker and media personality with a unique window into the NFL, in part because of his longstanding relationship with All Pro Dad, the national fatherhood program founded by Hall of Famer Tony Dungy. He interacts daily with NFL athletes, coaches, and alumni, and has conducted programming with over half of NFL franchises, with the Super Bowl, the Pro Bowl, the Pro Football Hall of Fame, many other notable events. He speaks on a variety of inspirational topics that include faith, leadership, philanthropy, media, mentoring, and fatherhood, all grounded in the practices and principles of servant leadership. He's the author of a book, and he has been married to his wife, Leslie, for 25 years. They have 4 children, and I am pleased to have him here. He is my friend, and I'm glad to have him here. His name is Darrin Gray. Darrin, welcome. Glad to have you.
It's my pleasure to be here.
So for all of you that are here live, if you have questions, ask them. If you have observations, share them. We want to know those things as we go. As with all of our podcasts, I've got a series of questions, some of which we may talk about, and some of which we may never get to. But I'm done talking for now. I want to get Darrin to talk to us. So, sir, how do you end up doing the stuff that you do that for many people, especially for sports fans, will say, man, how awesome is the work that you do and the people that you get the chance to interact with? Sort of, how did you tell us a little bit about the journey that ended you up here?
Well, I'm just a young kid from Anderson, Indiana, and I, had a chance along the way to work for the Pulliam family at the Indianapolis Star back in the day when they used to toss something in people's front yards every morning. They called it a newspaper.
Yeah.
And 60%.
You can Google it if you don't know what that is.
Right. And people used to read it, and it was amazing. And we really were sort of the curator of the community experience, right? Maine news, city, state, sports. And so began to think about those audience delivery mechanisms, and grew to be the general sales manager, and had very large budgets, lots of employees, and plenty of access to leaders around Indianapolis. And as I was doing that, I had a chance encounter with a man by the last name of Dungy. And I said, Dungy who? And he said, Tony, and hey, I've got this vision with the help of this national nonprofit, Family First and All Pro Dad, to sort of grow this enterprise and figure out ways to reach people, to get them on message, to be the best father, the best husband, the best man that they could possibly be on behalf of children. And that struck a chord in me. And I helped them to raise friends and raise funds just in my role at the newspaper. And wouldn't you know that eventually led to them hiring my company to do a consulting project that led to a large opportunity for many years that I was deeply immersed in. And now that little nonprofit is not so little anymore. And so it was the fun journey. But along the way, Kevin, met hundreds and hundreds of NFL players, coaches, alumni that were all kind of synchronized with this idea of, hey, I want to be a better man. I want to be a better leader. Man, when you get them where their heart is at, and then you begin to guide them toward community impact around things that really matter, like their identity, who they are as a man, then that's the deep heart of the leadership work that I do. And we find ways to really guide people toward becoming the true self, right? The identity, in my case, grounded in my faith, but in a lot of men's grounded in who they are as a man, a leader, a husband. So that's it. Right. Yeah.
So we'll stay on the sort of the celebrity part of this interview for a second.
Come on, sure.
And for those of you that are joining us, if you've got questions, feel free to ask them. But while this is the sexy part of the interview, if you will, I can tell you, having spent a number of conversations with Darrin, that where we'll be every bit as fruitful as where we're at right now. But you've had the chance. You've sort of told us about the journey, how you ended up with these relationships, with this orbit, being in this orbit. Yeah. Those of us that are here with you now are not in that orbit. We may know those names, we may know the personas, we may know the brands. Yeah. So I guess my question would be this: what can the rest of us learn from what you've learned from these top athletes and coaches? Obviously they are at the top of their field, but what uniquely can we learn as leaders and humans from what you've learned from them?
You know, in sports, we have a great opportunity to learn how to overcome conflict and adversity. And, the sports field is just the best analogy for helping how to manage change, how to work as a team. It just is the perfect ecosystem to teach people. And at one level, and I talked about identity earlier, but, who am I? Who shall I be in relationship with? And why is it so hard to figure out the first two? And so sports really helps us to figure those things out. Like, do I really want to be on this team? I call it the coalition of the willing. If you got a team that's not really built on the coalition of the willing, then they won't provide the compound attention. They'll be about themselves. They won't come in where 1 + 1 = 3, where you can really build something that's transcendent and more valuable. And so this is this sports context that I live in. And somewhere in there, you find out who you really are. And hopefully then you help your teammates to become the best version of themselves. And you build a team and you get a chance to compete for something that's really beyond an earthly trophy, but really relies in the relational space, the relational capital that's built on teams every season, every sport. And the great teams figure out that relationship part early. And those are the ones that tend to strive for greatness.
When we decided to do this today, you said, "Oh, this will be fun. It'll be after the Super Bowl," which of course it is. Yeah. And as you were saying that, I was thinking about a coach who had been a coach and then retired. And then he came back and won the Super Bowl a couple of weeks ago. And the story that I heard Bruce Arians saying was he went to the booth for CBS, and he says, and I got the chance to still go into the locker room, and I realized that's what I missed. It's that piece. It's that team piece. And I think organizationally, sometimes we have a hard time capturing what we mean by that. And in the right settings in sports, it's maybe more palpable. What would you add, if anything, to that idea of what we can take from what the best sports teams do around the team? You talked about that a little bit, about getting past the individual self. Anything more you'd add to that, Darrin?
Great teams are great at overcoming adversity. The neat thing about, football, you got 11 guys trying to do something and 11 guys trying to stop you from doing that same something. And so when you figure out how to work together as a group of 11 men on the field at any given time on either side of the ball, man, you can really accomplish a lot in life, because that translates off the field. Most of the times, those championship teams, those players know each other outside of the game. That is the case. You saw that made manifest with, that tight end named Gronkowski that got him a couple of catches, along with that amazing quarterback, arguably the greatest of all time. But the man behind that is a guy by the name of Clyde Christensen. And for those of you that are from Indy, you'll remember Clyde because he's just kind of the goat herder. Like he helped train up Peyton Manning, right, as the quarterback coach here in Indianapolis. In that era, Peyton will be known as one of the greatest of all times. But I think most of us will agree now with what Tom accomplished, that he is, in fact, the greatest quarterback ever to play the game. Well, there's always a man behind the man, and that man is Clyde. And Clyde, in many cases, as the quarterback's coach, sort of the QB whisperer. That's what Clyde is. Dear friend of mine, we did big programs all weekend long, me and Randall L. and Clyde Christensen, and we were making an impact in quiet ways and noisy ways in the greater Tampa area around faith strategy, because that's a big part. That's important to me. But the relational part of understanding Clyde's perspective of who Tom is as a man, as a husband, to Giselle on the world stage, and how he can be on mission to journey with them so that they might become these great folks, so that he can then pass it on to the Gronkowskis of the world and find ways to create really this intersection of relationships and so that we can live out our competitive nature. I'm competitive, man. I want to win. They wanted to win. So did the team on the other side of the ball too. But right. You saw they ran into some really stiff headwinds with the coach and his son and some of the national headlines there. And I'm not saying that's the reason they didn't perform well, but those things
certainly didn't help. Right?
They certainly take a relational toll if you don't have your compass done rightly. So I'm just saying the relationships matter. Man, the Bucs did it upright, and it was sure fun to watch that go and to be down at the Super Bowl and in and around that game. It was a lot of fun.
Were you among the 25,000?
I wasn't among the 25,000, but I had been there for 11 days, working quietly to and through NFL players, coaches, alumni, doing media, countless stories of millions of people with our communication strategies. And that was really my Super Bowl, is the week leading up to the Super Bowl. So, yeah.
So one of the things that there are a number of things that I think about when if you do the word association, Kevin, when you think of Darrin Gray, what do you think? One of the things that I think is of this phrase, and you've been talking about it a little bit. And so for those of you that are only listening, you don't know what that phrase is. It says on the screen here, success to significance. And you spend a lot of your time talking about that. You've really already been talking about that without us using those words. But say a little bit more about what that means. And now let's take it out of, we can certainly still use the sports context, but for a regular leader, we'll just say it that way, right? Like, what does that mean to you to move from success to significance, and how do we get on that path for ourselves?
Yeah, well, you got to first give people what they want before you can really get after and give them what they need. Okay, now what they want is to have, it's this unconscious competence, right? When you start thinking about, Dan Pink's work, mastery, autonomy, purpose, when you start thinking about, hey, we want to be really good and gifted at what it is that we do, and we want to be known for that. But that's success in an earthly context. The significance that we all yearn for is that deeper sense of joy and purposefulness that lies below the surface. It's not contingent upon earthly circumstance. Like earthly circumstance, oh, I won a game, I'm happy. That's great. You lose a game, I'm unhappy. All right, I win the account, I'm happy. I lose the account, I'm unhappy. How do we get to that deeper sense of, man, I did my best. I got better today. I'm doing something at lunchtime with Kevin to make the world a little bit better place. Like that's significance work. That's identity work. That's relational work. And when you do that, then, right, you can transcend those earthly circumstances and you can get to what you most need. And once you get to what you most need, then you got something that you can't imagine living without so that you can give it away. That's significance. So follow me, right? Once you got it and you got to that significance place, because it's what you most needed. It's the joy, it's that transcendent feeling. Then you're like, oh man, I can't imagine living without it. And boy, oh boy, now I get to give it away for a living. That's what you do, Kevin. You give away significance for a living by teaching people that they're valuable, that they matter, right? That they're important. So those are the things that I like to think about and spend time with people like you and the other listeners today that really want to dive in and really get to that deeper sense of who they are.
Well, and, we say here that we want to help as many leaders as we can make as big a positive difference as we can, because that's the only way the world changes for the better, right, is by someone leading. And so that's our way of trying to get at that in our heads and in the work that we try to show up with every day. But I the reason I wanted you to talk about that is that's if we're willing to do the work that you're describing, that's available to all of us, right? It doesn't matter what we do. I mean, some people, if you're listening to us and say, well, that's fine for Darrin to say that because he works with all these cool people. That's fine for Kevin to say that because he's written all these books or whatever you might be saying. It's not about Darrin or Kevin. It's about, that's available to all of us. Yes?
It is. It's about coming home. I talk a lot about bring them home. Okay, this idea that home is this place, figuratively, where you live and the people that you surround yourself with, and that bring meaning and value into your life. But in reality, it's knowing that you belong, that you matter, that your story matters, who you are, and why you matter. Who am I going to do it with? And I know it's easier said than done. I know people have been talking about purpose since before Rick Warren wrote the book.
Oh, yes, before that. Yes.
Long before that, right? And so for me, I planned my midlife crisis. I literally, when I was at the Indianapolis Star, I sat down. I still have it in my wallet today. And I spent time with amazing leaders here in Indianapolis who you would know many, like Chris Lamoth, now over at Elevate Ventures, and many others. He was at the Chamber at the time. And I sat down and I told him who I was. And I told him that I admired them and that I wanted to grow and that I wanted to be something that I wanted to be somebody that could leave a legacy. Now, this is almost 20 years ago now. I was in my 30s. And I decided that I wanted to do things rightly. Now, what does that mean? I wanted to do things in a way that would honor God and honor man and find a way to lift up the best in people. And the fact that I get to do it in sports, that's just it's just a context. Everybody can do that in the workplace that they're in. And all of these ideas are transferable. And if you hear this message, Kevin, and then you don't act upon it, you're being a poor steward. You're not doing right. You're now not acting upon those things that you know you should do. That's going to create cognitive dissonance. That's going to make you miserable. And in reality, that's this idea that we want to get people to that broken place when they go, man, I know there's something more. I want to chase after it. And everybody needs a guide. And so, gang, people on this call, follow Kevin. Like he can be your guide, both virtually, but also through the systems and the strategies that he's created. And if you'll trust him, he'll be able to guide you to where you want to go. And then ultimately you'll determine who you want to be doing that in relationship with. And man, together we can make a big impact.
Well, I thank you for saying all those kind things, and the check is on the way, Darrin. But let me say this: that I think one of the things that is the sometimes forgotten message of the sports analogy. I mean, we all use the sports analogy in business all the time, maybe too much in some cases. But I think the missing one is that the best performers all have coaches.
That's right.
You used the word guide a minute ago, but I wrote a blog post a long time ago, Darrin, that said that, John Wayne messed us up or something like that. Like, you can't be on your own. Like to think that that's what we need is the wrong answer. We need a guide, we need a coach, all of those sorts of things. Right.
We do.
And so I think that's completely true. There's a note that's come in. It's too long for me to put on the screen, so I'm going to need to read it. But what I want you to do, because so much of what we've been talking about is mindset. So if I just said to you, okay, if I said, Darrin, what are the mindsets that help leaders be successful? Where would your head go immediately?
Immediately to self-awareness, immediately to self-leadership, immediately to these places that I can't lead anybody. I can't have a positive mindset if I first don't believe in my own positive mindset. And it's not just a mindset, it's a heart set, right? And so I'd take those of your listeners that know a little bit about the Bible. Back in the day, there was some text, some scripture written about, having this heart set, this heart change in Ezekiel. Give me a heart of flesh. That just means let me know other people. Let me be attentive to who they are. And when you do that, God will help you to meet them where they are, where their need is, sometimes their brokenness is, where they're not effective. I call it left-hand leadership in a right-hand world. Like I'm right-handed dominant, but I need to be fluent and competent in leading with my left hand too, where my weakness is brought forth. I don't have it all together. I don't have it all figured out, but what I do know is when I do it with a guide, and I have 7 guides in my life. I have 7 men in my accountability circle that I am close to and I interact with on a weekly basis. And some of them have fame, some of them don't. But the point is, I don't do it alone. We are way better together. We've got to find a way to be self-aware and understand how we show up in every kind of setting. And when we do that and we're poised and when we're energetic, I call it the grit fueled by joy. Like when there is a deep joy, a grit, like I'm going to get this, like I'm going to compete and I'm going to win. I intend to win the things that I do. But when I do that grounded in a deeper joy, boy, that is the fuel that sustains, that keeps me going, that gets me in the flow state.
Right.
And that's where we want to be, right?
Yeah. And that's, so many people want to associate grit with like determination and all that. But when we start to think about having that be fueled, your words now, fueled by joy, and that the joy becomes the fuel of that, then that grit isn't like something, okay, I often said to people want to tell you to put your nose to the grindstone. I said, have you ever seen a grindstone? You don't want your nose there. Like, that's not a good strategy, right? But when it's rooted in something different, right? When it's rooted in something that comes from our heart and is in our heart, that changes everything. We had a question come in from LinkedIn, and it's a great long question. I'm going to read part of it,
Sure.
Darrin, and Dr. Jackson says, how does a leader touch the heart of people in the workplace to encourage positive change and promote teamwork when the culture is rooted in individualism and senior leadership toxicity? In other words, do you have any thoughts about that? This all sounds good, right, on the podcast, but I'm living in a culture where I don't know how to get there. You have thoughts about that?
I do. So this idea that there's a red bandana club, like when you get into difficult situations, crisis, conflict, you've got to be willing to help people get to where they need to go. You're putting on that red bandana, right? You're going to do the extra lifting. You're going to put them on your back. You're going to go the extra mile. They will ask you why eventually. Even in toxic cultures, they'll wonder why you're going the extra mile inside of a toxic culture. We don't always have to be heroic in all of our actions, but we do have to be integrous. We do have to do things rightly. And when we do that with frequency, people will notice and they'll ask why. And it's amazing how much we can accomplish when nobody cares who gets the credit. And, how are we going to do this and create opportunities for people to participate, sort of this higher level of leadership, sort of John Maxwell thinking, people support what they help to create. You just got to start getting in there and start creating some things that people can get involved in. And I'm not saying it's easy, right? There are toxic places. But if you're on a rescue mission like me, Kevin, like if you believe that, we need to go make a difference, then we can get people with us. And when everybody else is going down, man, we can be lifting people up. And that's hard for whoever wrote in, Mr. Jackson. And I'm not saying, the former chaplain of the Colts used to say that live hard. Like, I get that it's hard to do these things. But I'm telling you, it'll be worth it if you stay after it. And if your grit is fueled by joy, then you got a shot at winning. And people will eventually ask you why. And when they do, you better be ready to tell them what fuels your joy, your faith, your impact, your family, whatever those things are.
Well, you said it now twice. You ended there. You said it earlier. And I want to just make a comment to everybody. And that is that I often say when I'm coaching people that the most powerful learning is discovery learning, not what we tell them, but what they discover. And by us leading from that place and putting them figuratively on our, metaphorically on our back. And eventually when they say, why are you doing it? When the question is asked, now they're ready. And so we don't need to lead with our words. We need to lead with our feet. And then we get a much more powerful chance to be successful. And while it's still hard, right? It's easier when we know why we're doing it and when it's fueled by joy, back to your point.
Well, that's right. And so I mentioned the Red Bandana Club, just to finish that illustration.
Yeah, please.
Are you willing to go up even when everybody else wants to go down? That phrase came from 9/11 because there was a leader, a real person that was willing to go back up to rescue people. Now, he eventually gave his life, but he wore a red bandana. At the 9/11 memorial to this day, there is a memorial to that man. He is a real person. And he was saying, I'm willing to go back up into the heat, into the mess. And in the mess is the message, right? In the test is the testimony. How we do that matters. So to your friend from LinkedIn, are you willing to go up even if other people are coming down?
Yeah. And Nasser says, we are better together. You said that earlier, and I wanted to get that up here. We'll leave that sit there for a second. So shifting gears again, always wanting to be as practical here as we can be. All of our worlds have been changed over the last 11 months, basically, as of today, in terms of, COVID, pandemics, whatever, lockdowns, whatever word you want to use here. How have you adapted, or what have you learned through the last 11 months?
Wow. Now you're going to go deep here. The other things we've talked about are just like natural. They're second nature to me. But I tell you what, as an extroverted leader I get fueled up in the presence of other people, in the collaboration spaces, how we whiteboard. That's my most natural space. You put a marker in my hand, a whiteboard, and 10 committed leaders, we will leave that meeting better than we arrived at that meeting, individually and also for whatever problem we're solving for. Man, you got us, we love to solve problems. So how do you fuel up, right, when you don't get that natural benefit of being in the rooms together? So I've had to adapt like everyone else. I've had to be highly intentional about how I schedule my life and my day. And yes, you can get a lot out of Zoom, but what is it that we can do to find other ways to reach audiences, to get fueled up. I am a radical podcast listener. I am a book reader. I am a, incessant learner. And how do I find ways to continue to learn from folks that oftentimes look very different than me? Right now, I'm learning from a chef. Like what do I got to learn from a chef? But that chef happens to be married to the second most influential leader at the NFL. And so I'm learning from his wife, Tommy, who's teaching me things about cooking so that I might understand relationships between a Black couple at league levels so that I can grow and learn and have optics into family relationships, understanding about home cooking. Oh, he's back to bring him home again. He's back to the home. He's back. So for me, it's all connected, and I live in a connected world. We do. And that's why I love what you're doing about teaching people about how to do remote better, how to lead remotely. Like what you're trying to accomplish is so critical in these times. And what have you been learning?
Well, I've been learning that, we've been doing it a long time, right? The remote part of it. But I think that there's been a lot of things we've learned. I think a lot of people found that the first 6 weeks went better than they expected. Lots of leaders said, I didn't think we could do this. So we did it. But what happened is we ran it on adrenaline, and we ran it for a minute on purpose. Like we're in this all together. We got to figure this out.
That's right.
We can't completely. So, and then the honeymoon was over. And now, while we still have this context of doing it remotely with the COVID layer and everything that goes with that, we're settling into, well, there's a lot of things we could be better at, just like was true a year ago, right? A year ago, there's a lot of things people could be better at when they all saw each other every day. And so now what's happening is we're settling into this new rhythm, and some of us have figured it out better than others. But the reality is we realize there's still way more room for us to grow. And so the challenge is, how do we help people continue to grow and not let the remoteness be an excuse?
People are hurting, Kevin. And,
they are hurting.
I led a huge food outreach in Tampa last week in partnership with Feeding Tampa Bay and Athletes in Action and Super Service Challenge, and it was so super awesome. And that's all good. Like people do have physical needs, and we got to feed them. We've got to clothe them. We've got to meet physical needs. But the thing is, people are struggling with anxiety and depression and suicidal ideation, and these struggles that we have to do what I call the ministry of availability. It's the ministry of presence. It's getting off the Zoom. It's actually connecting with, we're Zooming. There's 30 people in a room. I notice somebody's drawing away, and it's me popping them a note and going, hey, here's my digits, call me. Yeah. And so just finding little ways to meet people where they are. And then for those of us that are called to deeper levels of impact and mission, how do we really do that at scale? And that's hard, right? To do that well at scale. But there are so many practices and that are happening these days where people that are getting that done, the Dungies of the world, through content, curriculum, programming, et cetera. So we just try to be present and find a way to lift that kind of work up, and hopefully we're making a little difference as we go.
The reality is, everybody, that a year ago, before there was social distancing, a pandemic, and we'd all heard of COVID, there was already an epidemic of loneliness and isolation. And to think that hasn't gotten worse is folly. The reality is it has gotten worse, and it will be, I believe, a longer term outcome of the physical pandemic than the physical pandemic. And while we might not all be in a place today where we can make that change at scale, the reality is that about 50% of people are having some sort of emotional challenges as a result of all of this stuff. 50%. That means if it's not you, it's the person, on the other end of your Zoom call. If it's not you, it's
me.
it's well, right. If it's
Right.
not you, it's the next person on your team.
Mhm.
And so while we may not be professionals to help in some of the ways that people need help, we can send people our digits. We can reach out. We can make sure that we're being empathetic and letting people know that we're here. Right.
Right. And social distance does not have to mean social isolation. And
Amen. Right. Physical distancing, social closeness.
yeah, you got it. And so however we say that, how we do this, and then how we present ourselves as available and keep safe boundaries and all that, as you and I continue to have measure of, profile, let's use that word if that's okay. It becomes interesting as folks touch us and want to interact with us in the social spaces and in the physical spaces and on the stages. And I don't need the microphone in my hand to be great, right? I try to do that in my own identity, but how do we do this in a way that really does touch people? A simple message, I say it this way. By telling somebody, hey, you made my day, like that makes it oftentimes makes their day. Like, you made my day. And that simple kind of an idea of just being present with people and being genuine about that, right? But it's a way that we can meet people, connect with people, even if it's only in small snippets in the social context. And, one day as this pandemic does lift, and it will, as we find ways to be more active in public and in private places, those of us that doubled down, those of us that really got serious about our own growth and learning, those that were serious about the success to significance, I think many of us will be better off. I intend to be one of those people, Kevin, in spite of whatever isms I might have toward a propensity toward working too much, or that's my most difficult thing in the pandemic, is because now it's inbound. Like I could literally be doing a podcast strategy, a thing every single day of the week. And I love it. And I was so thankful. I'm so thankful to be with you, and don't misinterpret what I'm saying. But for those of us that begin to have the inbound, how do we choose? When do I turn it off? When do I say no to Thursday night, 10 o'clock Pacific? And I'm like, no, I can't do that. But I'm happy to make things happen. So this one is perfect. Lunchtime, Indianapolis, Eastern Standard.
Except now I'm taking you away from your lunch. So
I'm good. Keep going. Yep.
I've got like 2 or 3 more things to ask. I'm going to really shift gears. And I see you muted. Are you okay? Make sure everything's okay there.
I'm good. My beautiful wife and Valentine just walked in. She just got her hair done. She's so beautiful. It's just like, I am such a blessed man. And isn't that appropriate for Valentine's weekend? As she giggles in my pathway.
Beautiful.
So right, it's a good day.
I'd rather be looking at her than you, but that's a whole other story. Okay, so question: what do you do for fun?
Man, I mix it up. I love to play chess. I took my 18-year-old son to the Super Bowl lead up with me. I love the beach. Man, I am the go to a place and sit on the beach for 7 straight days kind of a guy. Caribbean islands light me up. And I also love creative process. I love, filming and interaction and mashups with really talented people. So those are kind of some of the things that fuel my joy. And then I'm into Word, and those are the things that inspire me and keep me fueled up.
You said it. I already knew it, that you're a reader. So the question I ask everyone comes on this podcast. And I, as a practice, I like to ask smart people that I meet. And so that's why I added it to this podcast is, what are you reading?
My nightstand is full. And so I won't tell you about my good buddy that just wrote Power of Three, or Finding Hope and Healing, or Building an A-Team Culture, or the restoration of world changers like billionaires that came together to change the world. That's all interesting, reading those. But I'm going to lead you to this one. Heroic leadership. Now, what makes this was given to me as a birthday gift, but I'm going to lead you to page 98. And it actually breaks down the Jesuit practice in the 1500s of creating what they called the no-name teams. They would create 10-man teams to go into a particular city or a place where they sensed that there was a problem that needed solving, an intractable issue, people that needed educated, whatever those things were. But they would always send a team of 10. And they would go into these indigenous cultures, and rather than just start serving in ways they thought they needed to serve, they would go in and ask strategic questions. And they would say, what is it that we could really do that would be most useful? And these 10-man no-name teams would come together to help to get that accomplished. And it's changed the world. Like, how is it that the Jesuits and the schools and all the things that they've done were done? But I think about stuff like that. Like, how do I translate this sort of no-name team concept and use that as we send groups all over the world? I was working on a massive project in India last week that really is in Mumbai, is really through basketball with some NBA coaches. It's going to change the trajectory of the slums, and it's really cool. And so those are the kind of things I read about. I'm a little bit kind of wonky on the leadership side of that ledger, but hey, I love the catcher in the rye, and I'm all about quippy thoughts-provoking stories as well. So a nonfiction too, but I thought I'd bring a little leadership wisdom this morning through Heroic Leadership by Chris Lowney.
Beautiful. So here's my question for you, Darrin. You are so good at giving to others, but I want to give back to you. Like, where can people find out more about what you're up to? Where do you want to point people? And then I want to tell people about the project you told me about before we went live. But like, where can people connect with you? What do you want to share with them, et cetera?
Yeah. So lionslead.com. So gang, one of the things that drives my effectiveness is my ability to use assessments, which help people to understand where they're at so they can figure out where they want to go. Now, there's a myriad of leadership strategy and assessments, but I've got about 20 different assessments that I have helped to pioneer with Dr. Dan Snively. Many of your leaders here in the marketplace will know that, lionslead.com. You can find out more, but these practices help build better teams, build better people, and ultimately build better schools and other ecosystems. So coach right, sell right, lead right, hire right. We got it. You got it. That's a big one. DarrinGray.com. But for those of you that are local, gang, May 24th, okay, proexperiences.org. Proexperiences, plural.org. Man, if you like to golf and you could support the work I do at a top golf event, man, join me at that, right? Buy a bay for $1,000. Come in, meet all the Colts players I'm bringing, Gary Brackett and Joe Wrights and Chandler Harnish and many more. All those guys will be there. Get to have an experience with the pro, enjoy that, but also get connected to other business leaders in the community that are like-minded, that want to make a difference. Reach out to me, however you can get to me, and find a way to support that work. That'd be amazing. Thanks for asking, Kevin.
Proexperiences.org if you're in Indianapolis, DarrinGray.com, LinkedIn, name all those places. So real quick, before we go, you were telling me about the programming that you just helped finish for Athletes in Action and the new one you're doing now. But and people, you can find out about what he's about to say at the Athletes in Action YouTube page. But what did you just finish? 10 million views, for heaven's sakes.
Oh my goodness, gang. So get this, Pandemified. So we run an NFL sanctioned event every year for 34 consecutive years. It's called SuperBowlBreakfast.com. So you can go learn about that. But it's a live event. It's supposed to be at the Marriott Marquis. It's an NFL sanctioned event. We're so grateful to have the ability to do that. But as one of those leaders in that initiative, we knew that we might be pandemified. And so we began planning last summer, like, hey, what will that even look like? And we need to have a streaming counterpart to what we're doing. But this is how God works. we began asking questions of some broadcast outlets. I went to Armed Forces Network because I had a passion to get this broadcast, or narrowcast rather, to all the aircraft carriers. It's just something that I wanted to do to help the servicemen and women with this program. Wouldn't you know it, they said yes. And so when they said yes, that contractual agreement forced me to then actually create a broadcast quality program that
instead of a breakfast.
Instead of a live breakfast. And so we were still planning to do live breakfast at 50% capacity. Then we got the call to, hey, you're going to have to do 25% capacity. We still had a broadcast strategy. And then we got the call, you can't run your event at all. And so because lots of things were shut down in Tampa. And that's why I did a lot of outside programming. But the point of all that is to say, we just pivoted, created that, added 10 broadcast networks around the network. We have the Al Hayat network. You want to see something funny, Google the Al Hayat version of our host and MC. His name is Akbar. He's the host of American Ninja Warrior. Get him in Farsi, which is the native language of Iran, talking about how to get better, how Bart Starr is awesome. And that's super fun. But the point is, it was seen all over the world. It was broadcast into so many households, so many networks. We did serve the men and women of the military. We're so pleased about that. But the easiest way for people to find that now is just the residue of that on our YouTube page. If you go to athletesinaction.org's YouTube, you'll find it. You can get on there, take a listen. And it's something that I'm sure you'll enjoy and maybe you want to be part of for our next program. Next up, NCAA, John Wooden, Keys to Life, the Legends of the Hardwood. So that'll be coming up here in the next couple of weeks in Indianapolis.
Now we're talking John Wooden. Now we're talking Purdue alumnus. Just saying. Okay.
Just saying.
You're getting feedback that says people like your Blackboard, by the way. Old school Blackboard behind you for those that are watching.
I'm old school. For sure.
Final question for all of you who are watching, whether you're live or later. And the question is, now what? What are you going to do with this? What did you take from our conversation that you can do something with as a leader, as a teammate, as a father, as a parent, as a colleague? What can you do to make a difference? What can you do to start to move towards a place of significance? How can you find greater joy to create the grit that will help you be successful? Whatever it is that you took, the challenge is to take some action. And when you do that, good things will happen for you. We're so glad that you've been here. Darrin, thanks so much for joining me today. It was an absolute pleasure, as I knew it absolutely would be. And I want to thank all of you that have joined us live and all of you that have joined us later. This has been another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. And we're here every week, not always live, but we're here every week, and we hope that you'll be back again next week. You can learn more at remarkablepodcast.com. We'll see you next week. Thanks, everybody. Be remarkable.